Thank you. Well, it's great to be here in Aschaffenburg. It's actually my second time in this city. The first time I was on my bike cycling across Europe, but this time I cheated and came on a plane. So it got me here a bit quicker than last time, I have to say. But I'm not primarily a cyclist. I'm an evangelist. That sometimes leads to confusion when you try and explain to people what your job is. Recently, my car got broken into, and the insurance company wanted me to say again what my job was, so I was trying to explain it. Obviously, I hadn't done very well, because the next day I got a letter in the post, and it said, "To the Right Reverend Holy Father Michael Ots." But it is a joy to be able to be involved in university missions across Europe. I don't know what your favorite Bible book is, but one of my favorite Bible books is the book of Acts, because Acts is the book of mission. It's the book that describes how the gospel turned the world upside down. Have you ever wondered why Luke wrote the book of Acts the way he did? Did he just get all the most exciting stories he could think of and put them together into one volume? Well, I think there was a bit more order to it than that. I think there are at least two reasons why he wrote the book in the way that he did. The first reason is to show the fulfillment of Jesus' promise in chapter 1, verse 8. Jesus had said to his disciples, "You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth." It wasn't a request, "Will you be my witnesses?" It was a promise, "You will be my witnesses." And we see the lengths that God goes to make sure that that happens. But the second reason that Luke puts his book together in the way that he does is to show us how those early Christians turned the world upside down. And in particular, we see they did it in two ways. They did it through the public proclamation of the gospel. Peter on the day of Pentecost in Jerusalem, or Paul in Athens, proclaiming the gospel to the philosophers on Mars Hill. The gospel being proclaimed publicly, but also we see the gospel being shared personally. We thought about that last night. And we see how in the book of Acts, Philip shares the gospel with the Ethiopian eunuch. Or Ananias shares it with Paul, or Peter shares it with Cornelius. Public and personal evangelism. And Luke's point is this, that if we want to see our world turned upside down for Jesus, if we want to see our countries turned upside down for Jesus, if we want to see our universities turned upside down for Jesus, we need both personal and public evangelism. Public evangelism without personal evangelism will lack depth. It won't have much fruit. But personal evangelism without public evangelism lacks breadth. It won't reach many people. We need both. So tonight we're focusing particularly on this aspect of public evangelism. We've heard ideas from around the world, but as we've heard tonight, we're particularly focusing on what we often call the University Mission Week or Events Week. I'm particularly excited because, as Eliza said, this has grown beyond our wildest imaginations across this continent over the last few years. And we've seen in the last academic year nearly 40 mission weeks happening, 40 countries organizing over 190 mission weeks around Europe. But why are mission weeks so helpful? Let's have a think about that for a moment. What's the purpose of a mission week? A mission week is great because it can be a culmination of a whole year of events. We don't do it instead of the other evangelistic initiatives, but on top of and as a culmination of other things. Mission weeks are great because they can build momentum. You find that actually the best evangelists in a mission week are often the non-Christians because they haven't been told yet that evangelism is scary. And so they come along and they invite all their friends to come along. And as the week goes on, the numbers get bigger and bigger. They can have a big impact on the university, far more than just a single event or a small Bible study. They can display and build gospel unity as you center around Jesus and make him known. They can develop and train Christians. And it's amazing how Christians grow in confidence as they see the gospel proclaimed and defended publicly. And what you'll also find is that other Christians will join your group as you start to do this, because they'll see that you don't just exist as some kind of social club on campus, but you're there doing something that's really making a difference. Mission weeks really are worth it. And tonight I want to look at 10 principles that we've seen across Europe through mission weeks that have really made a difference. Now, these are principles, not methodologies, and your job tonight will be to think about how you can put these into your own context. But 10 principles behind effective mission. And the first is this: prayer. It's deliberately the first. I've done over 100 mission weeks around Europe, and I have to say that in every case there is a direct link between the prayerfulness of Christian students and the fruitfulness of the mission. God really does answer prayer. Actually, more than that, God sometimes makes us the answers to our own prayer, doesn't he? Because it's really hard to pray persistently and expectantly for our friends by name and then forget to invite them to an event when we have a mission week. Prayer is so crucial. But secondly, we need passion. These guys are from Leuven in Belgium, where we were doing a mission week last year, and we'll be doing another one in a couple of weeks' time. And one of the things that I really noted about these guys in Leuven was their passion for Jesus. You see, we don't just get passionate about events or organization, but we get passionate about the gospel. And that is the key ingredient that will overflow and be infectious in a week of mission. Of course, if you're going to organize a mission, you need to plan it. Now, I could give you lots of tips on planning tonight, but instead I wrote them all in a manual called the Mission Planning Manual. Now, the idea tonight was that we were going to give you all a copy, and we posted them all the way to Aschaffenburg, and they're currently locked in the DPD depot in the center of town. And as it's the Easter weekends, we won't be able to get them until Tuesday when you've all gone home. So if you want to get a copy of this planning manual, you've got 3 options. Option number 1, you can break into the DPD depot and steal them. And if anyone would like to do that, I would be really grateful. Option number 2, you can go online and you can get an electronic copy. Or option number 3, you can go to the foyer stand next door and you can put your name and postal address and we'll post them to you. But it really has everything that you'll probably need. I went to do a mission in Romania recently. It was a really well-organized mission. I said, how did you organize it so well? They said, well, we just followed the manual. So get the manual. It'll help you. At number 4, preparation. It's no good just organizing a week of events if the Christian students are not excited to make the most of the opportunity. And so you need to spend the year building up to your mission, preparing your whole group to make the most of it. They need to be ready to invite their friends, to be able to answer their questions, to be able to share their testimony, and to be able to lead someone to Jesus. Preparing the group. But of course also we need to have publicity. We want to spread the words. You're never going to get everyone in your university to come to an event. But it would be a real shame if there was anyone in your university that missed what was going on and didn't hear about it. And if we only invite our friends to hear about Jesus, then we're never really going to reach the majority of the university. Think about it this way. If your university had, say, 20,000 students in it, imagine you've got 40 in your local IFES group, and you all pray for and invite 5 of your friends to come. That could be 200 people that could hear about your mission. But that would only be 1% of your university. How are the other 99% going to hear? You're going to have to publicize it. Here are some ideas that we have found effective. You can hand out flyers, attractively produced and delivered with a smile. You can put up posters. This is the one from Finland just a couple of weeks ago that will grab people's attention. You can make a splash on social media and make sure that everybody changes their profile pictures and cover photos. You can also put t-shirts together, or if you live in Britain and it's colder, hoodies, or whatever you like. Don't know what you'd do if you were in Iceland. Kind of big coats, but displaying the information about your mission and showing the branding. Again, in Belgium, they chalked the logo and the title of the mission week onto the pavement so people couldn't miss it as they walked in to the university. A flash mob is one way of generating a lot of interest. Or a stall that serves tea and coffee and invites people to answer a question of the day. And you can be creative. You can think of other ideas too. In one university, this guy dressed up as a hamburger to invite people to the lunch. And these other guys dressed up as scientists to invite people to the talk on has science buried God? In fact, they did something even better. They, outside the main entrance to the university, imported a massive pile of mud. And then they gave people spades, and they asked people to take a spade load of that mud and stick it on one pile that said yes, or the other pile that said no, in response to the question, has science buried God? It was very creative, and everybody got talking about it. I was doing another talk on the question of, is there life after death? And so this guy dressed up as death and ran around the university scaring people witless. And then someone else came around behind giving out flyers. In fact, it was an even better story from Poland. In Poland, there were 3 guys who wanted to invite people to their mission week, and because there were only a few of them, they went round the dormitories, the halls of residence. And the first guy dressed up as death, and he knocked on the door, and the student would open it, and he would go, "Rah!" And then he would run off, and 5 minutes later, the next student would come by dressed up as an angel. And the angel would knock on the door, and the student would open it, and the angel would say, "Hi, did death come by a minute ago?" "Yes." "Well, you don't need to worry about death," said the angel, "because Jesus has the answer, and you can come and find out about it at this event." And then the angel ran off. 5 minutes later, another student came along dressed up as the devil. Knocked on the door, student opened it. "Hi, did an angel come by 5 minutes ago?" "Yes." "Did they invite you to a Christian event?" "Yes." And then the devil said, "Whatever you do, don't go." And of course, what you never tell students to do you never tell students not to do something because they all do it and everyone went. Be creative, get the word out, publicity. But you also want to provoke interest. You know, some people won't come to an event because they think, oh, it's Christian and I'm not interested. So you want to get them thinking about the topic or the question so that they will come and want to find out. You could do questionnaires like they did in Serbia, or an interactive study. This talk on love was an interesting one. We asked people, how loved do you feel? I gave them a peg, and they had to vote by putting it on the relevant points on the scale. The next day, they had a talk on, is there a cure to stress? And so they gave people plastic balls, and they got them to put in the tube to designate their response, yes or no. I have no idea what the Cookie Monster was doing, but it certainly generated interest. This is a toasty. This forms the staple diet of most British students. It's kind of counting as a cooked dinner, I think, for most of them. But an event that we found very effective is called Text-a-Toasty. You could do it with donuts or cookies or whatever people eat in your country. But people simply text a question about God, the Bible, or Christianity, and an order of a toasty, and in 10 minutes they get the toasty and an answer to their question. It's amazing the kind of conversations it can open up. Or you could put on a lecture before the mission starts. In Prague, a couple of years ago, they invited John Lennox to come and speak on the question of science and God. They booked the largest lecture room in the university, and the authorities said that might not be a very good idea. This is a very atheistic country, and we don't think many people will come. They were wrong. Not 700 people came. 1,000 people came. 300 couldn't get in because there were so many, but 700 listened to that lecture. It was a great way to launch the mission. In Serbia, they invited Nick Vujic, the Christian motivational speaker. And they invited him to come and speak, and because he's so well known, quite a few people came. This was in the city of Novi Sad on the very first day of the mission week. How fantastic to be able to invite 3,000 people to then come to the following night's events. But it doesn't have to be as big. You may not have Nick Vujic, you may have Michael Ots, but he could come and do a debate. And we got the local atheist society to put someone up. And of course, the atheists all wanted to come and support it, and then they came back and heard the gospel each night that week. But create interest and provoke people to think. But of course, the most likely way that people will come to your events is if they're invited by a friend. If you invite them. That's still primarily the way that it works. This guy in the picture with the beanie on is called Rob. And I met him a few years ago at a mission week that I was speaking at. He'd been living for the last year with a group of Christians in a house, and they'd been really friendly to him, and it included him in all sorts of things, so that when the mission week came around, he wanted to come, partly out of his friendship to them and partly out of interest to the talks. After each talk, he came up to me with a whole list of questions that we sat and discussed for about an hour. And by the fourth day of the mission week, I went up to him and I said, "Rob, what are your questions today?" He looked at me and he said, "I haven't got any questions left. You've answered them all." So I said, "Rob, why don't you become a Christian then?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure. I need to think about it." So I said, "Well, look, the following night is the last night of the mission. I'm giving you 24 hours to think of a good reason why you shouldn't become a Christian. And if you can't, by tomorrow night, you're going to become one, right?" He said, "Okay, deal." He came back the following night. At the end of the talk, I went straight to Rob. He wasn't going to get out of that room before we'd had a conversation. I said, "Rob, have you thought of a good reason why you can't become a Christian?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I think you should then, shouldn't you?" And he said, "I'm scared." I said, "Rob, don't be a wuss." He said, "How do I do it?" I said, "It's quite simple. We could talk to God. I'll pray, you can pray, your mate can pray. We'll do it in 5 minutes." He said, "Okay." So I prayed, he prayed, his mate prayed, it was done. A week later, my friend of that particular group sent me a text message, a photo message, and it was Rob standing at the front of the Christian meeting sharing his testimony. He's still going on with Jesus today. But he came not because I was speaking, but because he had a friend. And he came to a series of events where his objections were answered, so that what might have taken 10 years happened in 5 days. Personal invitation is key. But of course, at the center of what we do is proclamation. We want to proclaim the gospel. That's really key, isn't it? And there's some different aspects to this. We want to make sure that it happens in a place that's convenient. Obviously, if it can happen in the university, that's a great place to be, but not every university in Europe will let you run events. That doesn't mean you can't do it. You can do it in other places. This is a cafe in Serbia. This is an underground wine bar in Prague. This is a hotel in Romania next to the university. This was a pizzeria in Belarus a couple of weeks ago. This is a tent up in the north of England with heating, you'll be glad to know. But it's actually, a tent was a really good idea because not only was it in the center of the university, but it was massive publicity for the week. It needs to be in a convenient place. But you also want to engage with the kind of questions that people have. A few years ago in Malta, they ran a survey across the campus on the first week of term. If you could ask God one question, what would it be? And they got 500 people to respond to that survey, including the president and the prime minister of Malta. As a result, they collated all of those things together so that they could work out which were the 5 most popular questions. And then they displayed those around the campus and then put on a series of 5 talks answering those particular issues. About 30 people came each day. By the end of the week, about 20 had said they wanted to study the Bible further. And do you know how many students are in that group at that time in Malta? 2 Christian students organized that. So don't say that you're too small. It needs to be engaging. It also wants to be attractive. People don't want to come and sit in a cold lecture room, particularly in the evening. So think about your decor. It wants to look nice. Think about the food and the drink that you're going to serve. Make sure that it's good. Think about the music that you're going to play. Make sure that it creates an environment that people feel relaxed in. Our events will either underline or they will undermine the message we're trying to present. The decor, the food, the music, they're important. And we can also be creative. We're not just giving lectures, but that can be supplemented by music, by dramatic sketches. We heard earlier in the testimony how it was a drama that really spoke in that situation. We can share testimonies of how the gospel makes a difference. It could be an ordinary student, or it could be someone with a more fascinating or dramatic story. This is my friend Slavko speaking on his conversion from being a mafia boss to a Christian pastor. And of course, lots of people came because they were intrigued by the title. So be creative in what you do. But number 9, we can also develop partnerships. That's a great reason for putting on a mission week. You can invite people to come and help you. And there's more reason for them to give up a week and fly maybe to a different country and do that. This was the mission week in Prague. And they had guys from the UK and also people from Bosnia coming to help organize that mission. So if you're small particularly, then actually get other people to come and help so that you can do it together. I did a mission week recently in a city where there was 1 Christian student. But because they invited others to help, it was possible to do a mission. We heard about the mission week in Ukraine, in Kiev. One of the joys has been, we've got someone from Kiev here tonight, or from Ukraine at least. But one of the joys in Ukraine is that as they have developed missions themselves, they are now sending teams to help others. So they have sent teams to Moldova and to Latvia and to Belarus to help them as well. But number 10, we also need perseverance. Perseverance, because actually a mission will generate interest that needs to be continued. There needs to be follow-up. I wonder what you'd expect to see happen at the end of a mission. In the book of Acts, in chapter 17, we read about how Paul was preaching in the city of Athens. And it says that at the end of his address, there was a threefold response to what he said. It says some people mocked, some people wanted to hear more, and other people believed. And as we engage, particularly in mission weeks, I think we can expect all of those 3 responses. There will be those who mock. Don't give up when that happens. We're tempted to feel that we've done something wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean we have. People mocked Paul. People mocked Jesus. I always say if you want to be 100% positive in your response to the gospel, then you want to be more successful than Jesus. And good luck with that. So don't worry if people respond negatively. Challenge them to read a gospel. That's what we do. And to think about it for themselves. But also, don't assume that everyone will be negative. I remember speaking at one mission week, and the lunchtime talk had been in a very public venue, and a lot of people had heard it. And as I was walking across the campus that afternoon, there was a group of guys looking quite hard, and I kind of walked past them, and just after I had, one of them shouted out after me, "Oi, you!" Now, he said it in such a tone of voice that I decided the best thing to do was to keep walking. And so he shouted again, "Oi, you!" I thought, well, now maybe the best thing to do would be to turn around. So I turned around and said, "What, me?" He said, "Yes, you. Were you the one doing that talk earlier on?" And I thought maybe this is the time to actually pretend that it was my twin brother that was doing the talk. But I owned up and admitted that it was me and stood there waiting for what I expected was to be a barrage of insults. But then he said, "Can we talk more? It was really interesting." Sometimes we expect people to be negative, maybe because of the way they look or what they've initially said. But it doesn't always happen that way. Yes, some mock, but some will want to find out more. And that's why things like the Uncover resource are so helpful to do in small groups or one-to-one, so that you can encourage people through the pages of the Gospels to introduce them to Jesus. There'll be people who are intrigued but not convinced, and we need to help them as the mission is finished to come to discover Jesus for themselves. But there will be other people who will believe. And it's been wonderful over the course of the last few weeks to see people coming to know Jesus, not just in missions in the UK, but missions in other parts of Europe, in Belarus and other places too. The gospel really does work. So maybe I can ask you this question. What is stopping you from trying this yourself? If you've not done this in your university, what is stopping you from giving it a go? 2 final stories. 8 years ago, I went to Serbia for the first time. And the first city I went to was a city called Novi Sad. And I remember sitting in a cafe in the university in Novi Sad, and I spoke to 2 of the members of that student group, and I shared the idea of mission weeks. Do you know what one of them said? They said that would never work here. We could never get a venue. No one would ever be interested. We're not going to bother. And yet, over the last 2 or 3 years, Novi Sad has run some of the best mission weeks I've seen anywhere in Europe. Why? Because some other students came on board who didn't say, this is why we can't, but rather they said, how could we do it? They didn't have that negative, we're different and it can't work, but how can we do it here? As they set about doing it, it didn't work straight away. It took several years to get a suitable venue, but it has worked, and it does work there. Last year, I was in Belarus, and we were speaking at the first mission week ever in that country, in the capital city of Minsk. We had a fantastic week, and actually it was amazing considering the fact that actually it's probably one of the most difficult countries in Europe in which to even hold an evangelistic event. Technically, it's not meant to be allowed, but that doesn't seem to stop them. We had a great week in Minsk, and so I chatted to the staff worker and the students afterwards, and I said, how do you feel this has gone? And they said, this has been great. I said, what will you do next year? And they said, yeah, next year we think we'll do it again. I said, great. They said, yeah, next year we're going to do it in 11 cities. I said, what about trying 2? They said, no, like we haven't got time to wait to just do 2. We're going to do it in every student city. I said, are you sure? They said, yes. I said, really? They said, yes. And so they have. And just 2 weeks ago, I went to speak at 2 of them. We went to one city. I showed you the pictures earlier. They had booked out the main pizza restaurant in the center of town. I went into it, I said, this is never going to work. Like, no one's going to come and listen in a pizza restaurant. Anyway, about 120 people came. And then I said, well, no one's ever going to listen because it's a restaurant. They said, just wait. So the guy stood up and said, this is Michael. He's now going to give the talk. And everyone went absolutely quiet, and I preached for half an hour. By the end of that week, 17 people had said they wanted to follow Jesus. We went from there to another city on the opposite side of Belarus. I was only able to be there for the very first day of the mission week. My expectations were kind of low. It was the first day and so on. But we went and we had a lunchtime talk in a cafe in the center of town. And then in an art center, we invited people to an evening event. It was miles away from the center, and I thought no one would come. About 70 did. At the end of the talk, I was chatting to people, signing a few copies of different books. And then a lady came up, a student, and she looked visibly moved. And it was obvious that she wanted to talk, but she was rather shy of the people around, so I told them to scarp her, and we went to one side, and through translation, she spoke to me, and she said this. She said, this morning, someone gave me a flyer to come to this event. I've never been to anything like it before. I came along at lunchtime not knowing what to expect. She said, but I was so intrigued by what I heard that I had to come back tonight. She said, you have to understand that I grew up as a child going to the Orthodox Church, but all I ever experienced as a child through that was fear. But as you spoke tonight, I sensed the freedom of Jesus. And she said, my life is never going to be the same again. She said, what must I do? I said, well, we could talk to God. She said, what now? I said, yes. And so all 3 of us, with tears in our eyes, sat together and prayed as she put her life in the hands of Jesus. You know, that day, I didn't expect anyone to become a Christian. It was the first day of the mission week. My lunchtime talk was on Has Science Buried God? My evening talk was on What About Other Religions? They're not particularly the talks I would expect people to become Christians off the back of. But you know what the Bible says? God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above what we ask or imagine. Do you really believe that? And if you do, what's stopping you from seeing what God could do through you through a mission week this year?